Today we're going to talk about how to use the app for viewing the data from the inverter and program the inverter. You'll need a installer account, which you can get from your distributor, or if you're the end user, you'll need an end user account, which you can get from your installer. This is what you'll see when you open the app, and this is viewing it on a MacBook, but it also works on iPhones, iPads, and there's a version for most Android devices, although Google Pixel phones have been having some issues with full use of the Android version for some reason. And also older Samsung devices have a Bluetooth issue accessing the inverter. It's a common Bluetooth issue with a lot of apps on the older Samsungs. Any of the newer ones should be fine there. So you'll see this. Local access is when you're connecting directly to the inverter via Bluetooth. And you'll need to do this at the very beginning to connect it to Wi-Fi and get it connecting to the portal. Once the inverter is connected to the Wi-Fi and online, then what you'll do is sign in for remote access, and you can connect to the inverter anywhere. You don't have to be next to it within Bluetooth range. So we're going to put in our username and password and hit sign in for remote access. If you're doing local access, don't put in the username and password. You're just going to hit that and it'll bring up the list of Bluetooth devices it finds. But for remote access, put in your username, password, and we're going to sign in for remote access. And here it gives the option for creating an end user. This is when you're first setting up someone's system. Once you've got it set up, you'll see the search to end users or inverters. If you're signing in as an end user, you'll just see your inverters here. We're going to search for, hit the search button to actually search. And we're going to bring up this inverter. You can see we've got one inverter. We got the little green button, means it's online. We're going to click on that. And first screen we get is this one saying how much solar we're getting, what the grid is doing. You can see by looking at the little animation that it's going out to the grid from the solar, with some of it going to the battery and some going to the house as well. Scrolling up, we can see basic settings. We're on grid, we're in self-consumption mode. We are charging the batteries at 4 kilowatts, they're at 72%. And we're in a time-based control right now. This particular system is a net metered, but it also has a time of use. So they've got it set to basically top off the batteries right before the time of use charges start in the afternoon to make sure they're full. And how much is going to the home and the different smart loads. We can see how much the solar is produced today, how much the home has used. Okay, self-power, this is for the total consumption today, how much came from the grid and how much came from solar. So far today, the solar has been mostly recharging the batteries and the load's been running off the grid. So we didn't power a lot of the loads from the solar. If we looked at this later in the afternoon, it would be a lot higher solar for this particular system. And since we've logged in as an installer, we see a full list of the settings here. When you log in as an end user, you won't see the full list of settings. There's only a few settings you can adjust. You still get the energy, and this is kind of showing you graphs of what's going on. Here we've got our load, and we're looking at a bunch of the load came from the battery until early this morning. It switched over to grid, and that was probably because the battery level got too low. We'll look at that in a second. We use grid, especially for this big block here. That was charging the EV in the morning. And then you can see the solar starting to participate and power the loads. So it's barely drawing anything from the grid anymore. You can see down here a little thing of how much came from solar, how much came from battery, and how much came from the grid for the loads. If we go to the solar tab here, you can see here's what the solar did today. Initially, it started going to the load, and then it got so it had enough to also be going to the battery. And then at this point, you can see it's limiting the amount to the battery, still powering the load and sending the excess to the grid. Looking at the battery, you see two graphs. The upper one here is discharging, that's powering the load, and then recharging the battery once the solar kicked in. And then you can see here charge level going down. We're at 67% at midnight. It went down to 50%. Kind of stayed there. That's when it flipped the grids back, or the loads back over to drawing from the grid, and then it charged back up, and we're up to 72% already charging from the sun. And we can also look at the grid tab and see here's when we drew from the grid, and then later in the day we started selling to the grid. We can change which day we're looking at. We wanted to look at yesterday, and here you can see we're drawing from the grid, basically going to zero, selling a little bit to the grid, drawing a bunch in the afternoon again, and then zero draw from the grid during that time of use, peak use times here. Going back, if you have the installer, you've got your settings, and these are all the stuff for setting all the controls and operation of the inverter. We've got a different video that goes through all those details there. We've got equipment maintenance, and that is where you've got your on-off button, and that's where you can put the inverter in standby to do firmware updates and stuff. We also have our sync device time, which will sync the time of the inverter with the time clock of your device that's connected to it. Also clearing data and resetting if that's necessary. Logs, we can see what kind of logs and alarms. In this case, we don't have anything in the history, but if you have any alarms, low battery, overload, anything like that, those will show up here. And then switch is if we want to go back to our list of inverters and look at a different inverter in there. And you can see what a system with two inverters would show when we go into that end user. We've got two inverters there. If you log in as an end user, what you'll see is just this screen with your however many inverters you've got to begin with. So that's basically it for the overview of the app, and we've got some other videos that get into more depth of particular bits and pieces of that.